for this amazing exhibit. And it is up through March the 2nd. So without further ado, I'm very honored to introduce Billy King and Tim McMeans to you all.
We'd like to thank Prudence for giving us this opportunity to show together. It's been a pleasure, and thank you all for coming. This is a really nice crowd. I think they're all here for you, though. So you
No, I don't think so. Oh, where did Prudence go? Right here. Thank you so much. Thank you. It really is.
Thank you all very much. I'm very honored to have you all here.
Not only do I thank you, but I thank the rest of your staff, your husband, everyone that contributes here and works here and provides this great space for artists. And I'd like to thank Tim. We've shown together a couple of times, I think. But it's always, I have to do this carefully because I don't want to, it's always great to work with and show with someone younger than myself because I always learn something. And Tim is an educator and a young person that I learned from, and I appreciate that. So thank you, Tim, for being a buddy and for this opportunity to show with you.
Likewise, Billy and I have been showing. We've shared wall space together in a lot of different galleries, and then I think
We've been kicked out of the same gallery.
Yeah.
Talk louder.
Yes, we've been kicked out of the same galleries. Billy is, he's been a mentor and a friend, and I've learned a lot from just hanging around you, and then so much so that I moved 3 minutes away from him so that I could just talk him a little bit more, but which has been a real benefit because we can bounce ideas off each other, we can critique, we can do all those kinds of things, and so I think that's added to our growth. I think we've both continued to grow as artists, and I think that's the goal. Is to continue to grow and never really stop, tinkering around in the studio and trying to find something new. And so it's great to be able to have the opportunity to put it all together and showcase it.
So now that we've learned that Tim has figured out what not to do by looking at me, I'd like to ask Tim a question.
Yes.
Tim, would you tell me about smoked paper?
Yes, thank you.
And how you, where you get it, how you do it, why do you do it, and does it matter whether I use mesquite, oak, or pinon to do it? Oh, I'm not going to do it though.
I don't know. I saw a red-tailed hawk on a painting the other day, so I'm not.
You don't own subject matter.
That's good. The smoke stain paper came just out of the need to do something different. I'd been just kind of acrylic painting for a long time, and it was something that I toyed around with in college. I was doing printmaking in college, and I wanted a surface to work on, and so I had seen back when people still looked at books. There was I would go to, well, I went to UTSA, so when I had my downtime between classes, I would go and hang out in the library and just pull books and just go through them, just whatever it was I could see. And our books have lots of great pictures, so obviously. But in the back of one, there was a picture of John Cage, and I don't know if you know John Cage. John Cage was a Renaissance man. I mean, he was a musician and artist and poet and all these different kinds of things. And so there was an old picture of him just with a rolled up piece of newspaper, and he set it on fire, and he had this piece of paper over it. And I thought, that's really interesting. And so I just started playing around with the technique and started messing with it and trying different things and seeing what I could do with it. And so I did a few drawings with it, printed on it, and just kind of left it behind. And then later on, after graduating and painting for a while, I just felt like I just needed something new. And so I was just going through my old stuff and looking through old sketchbooks, and I found a couple of those old drawings, and I thought, how can I do this, but how can I do this on a larger scale? How can I expand this a little bit more? And so I started, tinkering with it and putting the paper over the fire and capturing the smoke. And then just figured, I really like the layering process. I also just metaphorically, I like the idea that we've all been through the fire. The idea that you take something that's nice and pristine and perfect, and then life comes along and damages it in some way and messes with it in some way. And so how do you take it back to being something that's valuable again, right? And finding the value. So I like the idea of just kind of taking in that direction. And obviously the smoke creates these really kind of interesting, textures and there's a movement to it as well. And so I started layering them on top of the panels and then, decided to draw on top of them. And I think the thing that when I first started doing them, the pen and ink I started using, I found just kind of, again, this is all process. I found that the old school dip pen, crocodile pens and ink really was what would stand up to the damage that the paper had experienced. And so I started drawing on top of them and started, painting on top of them. And drawing was really the first thing, because drawing was kind of those things where the drawing has always been the step to get to this, the step to get to the painting, step to get to the sculpture. And so I thought, well, if I can expand on this and I can enlarge it a bit, I wanted them to have a presence. I wanted them to have this presence on the wall. And so that's where it started. And I use Pinon because Pinon obviously has a wonderful smell. If you've been to New Mexico, that's kind of it. But Pinon, for whatever reason, gives me the best smoke. And so, Billy will call me up and say, "What are you doing?" "Well, I'm smoking paper." And that always so,
he gets it from his students at school, right?
Exactly. So but it's just part of my process and something I've just stayed with. And then it's evolved a little bit. I started putting, I started adding text and, animals have kind of become something that I guess, especially the ravens, have kind of become things that people expect to see. They're all animals that I've had some sort of experience with. I photograph all my own animals. If I don't have a connection to it, I really don't want to mess with it. And so the animals are ones that I've had experiences with. I've photographed them. They're my own references. I can't Google. That's just my process. And so they've just kind of become part of the imagery, and then started adding in other objects too. Billy's obviously one that when when you look at his work, it's full of objects, and he's giving us the physical objects. I just started adding in the objects that I think have been important to me here lately, in that direction, that way. So if you want to talk a little bit, you can. Did I answer your question?
You did. Do you have a question?
I would like to know, how do you settle on peace? Because I've even brought you little nuggets and pieces and things like that. What's your process in putting that all together? Because when we look at this, there's a lot of different things that work here. How do you lay that all out and decide where it's going to come from and where it's going to go?
Trial and error. Well, I kid, but I do a lot of trial and error. And the problem for me is that I'm working with an abstract painting, a representational painting, and some sort of sculptural element. So the real problem for me is taking those three radically different things and making them into one whole. And I usually start, I carry a sketchbook all the time. There's a sketchbook out no there isn't, I'm not in the truck. And so ideas come to me in placement and whatnot. And things show up in the sketchbook. And then that drives the rest of the creative process. I don't always know why those things show up in the sketchbook, but things show up, whether it's just a layout, a composition, a particular bird, animal, a landscape. But if I start seeing it in my sketchbook, then I think that's probably important, and I try to honor that. So, and I've developed my own little visual vocabulary around those objects or those things. But usually it's driven by a place. I'm originally from the High Plains, North Texas, Northwest Texas. So the Llano, the plains up there are speaking to me right now, sometimes, and have been for the last few months. So the place speaks to me, and then there's usually in the sculptural element some sort of marker or something about that makes that fixes that place. And then the abstract is really about tying those two elements together. So that's probably, normally, that's kind of the way that goes. And I believe that all the objects of the earth have an incarnate story of some sort to tell. So even, not necessarily all of them, but a lot of my paintings have something hidden on the backside, which is usually from that place. There's one over here that you can't see because people are standing in front of it that has dirt in it that you can see. I also encapsulate dirt behind some pieces that come from the place, that landscape. There's a little seaside thing over here in the front window, and I think there are seashells and stuff on the backside of it, in the backside of it. Sometimes there are rambling poems, or not poems, free verse, that have something to do with that place or that time. But so there's three. It's a kind of three piece that's pulled together into one. And I like the idea, I refer to my son who teaches literature, and he talks about Moby Dick and the book Moby Dick. You can, if you read Moby Dick, it's first of all a great adventure story. But secondly, every other chapter gives you a treatise on how to process a whale. Pick it up and look at it sometimes. So you've got an adventure story going on here with Starbucks. That's where we get Starbucks coffee. And then you come to the next chapter, and it's how do you butcher and render this whale down? And if you take it as a whole, it's kind of a really indictment on manifest destiny. So there's like three ways you can take that book. With my art, I'm trying to be at that place where it's only about process and me. That's pretty. But I do like to show it, and I do appreciate people who appreciate it, and I want people to appreciate it. And there's three ways that probably you could appreciate it. You might appreciate it because it's a pleasing to you as a picture, just as a picture. Or, secondly, you might appreciate it because of the craftsmanship, the ability to put the three things together. And lastly, you might appreciate it because it says something to you personally. And I could give you some hint of how it appeals to me personally, but that doesn't necessarily mean it should appeal to you or speak to you or have that personal message for you. I'll use this little one right here. Somebody really needs to buy this little thing. I think it works okay, just as an object. It's kind of pleasing. And then secondly, It was put together well. The painting is competent, and a little piece of sculpture is competent. But the third thing is, and this is where it's interesting to me, is I have a friend, I go to the HEB almost every day, it's my social life. And there's one of the guys that works in the Texas Outdoors, what do they call it, where they sell the plants and backyard, Texas backyard. Anyway, this kid works there, and because he's outside and I like plants and that kind of stuff, we kind of made a connection. And he talks to me about Mark. And so this cedar tree used to grow on the side of a little hill, maybe half a mile from the house. And I painted a bunch, a lot. But now there's housing all where that tree was. And so one afternoon I was talking to him about that, and he said, well, what do you do about that? And he said, well, I do something about that. And I said, what do you do? He said, well, I break stakes. So what this kid does is when they plot out a place for development, he likes to go and break the stakes off, which is a losing proposition. But on this part of the thing here is time, and this is made out of an old harmonica, but I'm really using it to be stakes, because as you well know, everything is always something else. Right? So these represent stakes. This represents time of when this place was what it was. And in the backside of it, there's the little poem that he gave me about the ceremony of breaking stakes in the afternoon. So the name of this is?
On the other side.
No, this side has my name. This side is. It's Billy Keane over here in the ceremony. So, you have a question?
Do you carve your own birds, or do you find?
Yes. I carve my own birds, but I also use found objects and whatnot. So I've started collecting these shoe lasts. And I think, I'm not sure, I think it's because your feet are connected to the earth. And it implies humbleness, and it implies all kinds of things that are earthy and down to earth and that are fixed. And the bird usually is about free agency. The bird can go wherever it wants to. The earthbound stuff. I think that's what it's about. I'm not really sure.
Everybody thinks different, but I think of the shoe as your path on the earth.
Well, it is about the path. All of my stuff is about our journey, or the path that we're on. And I'm not really sure about the shoe lasts, but I'm using them. And they are, found object. So I like to use found objects like the Dadaist, maybe, or some of those artists. But yeah, normally I create all the birds and whatever.
How about your frames? I assume you make your own frames?
They're Baltic birch normally. Sometimes maple. It depends on what's cheapest. I used to anyway, but the Baltic birch. This is masonite that's been coated out. I'm probably not painting for the ages. I don't know how archival these materials are. But yeah,
How many times do you prepare a panel and decide I really should stop here? Because it would be a great abstract painting.
Often. The back sides of these things are really sometimes, to me, more interesting than the front, because it has whatever you have to do to make, like this is too different panels and boxes, and there's some little bolts in here, and I had to cut and alter this area so a wire would go through and it could hang. So there's, and that's all just part of the process and that working when you're out of your brain. Yes, sir.
Could you comment on the red spot on the painting?
This one?
Yeah.
Well,
Planned or not?
oh, no, it's planned. It's very, the problem with this painting is I had to get the eye moving. I didn't want to do this, but the eye wanted to do that, so I had to put that little spot in there. A lot of the stuff has real meaning, but a lot of it's about paint. Sure.
I wanted to ask Tim, you were talking about smoking this paper. Could you describe visually how you do it? Do you have the fire under it, hold it over it? Do you do it inside? How do you do that?
I have a fire pit, and I'll get a good fire going, and I've got the tongs, and it's kind of timing how long, and just kind of within practice, learning how long I can keep it there, or if I'm gonna lose it. Sometimes I do lose it, which is okay. Sometimes I'm not in back. And it's a nice little dance, and I've got my one of my shoes usually has a smoother side than the other. But it's sometimes the holes are kind of fun too. But there's one piece in here I think that actually it's the curated flowers in the corner over there. That's one where the fire went flowing through the paper. But I like the opening. I like the negative space, and so I worked and used it in there. So and it's just a lot of times it's just timing and just kind of understanding I've got enough or not enough or whatever it is.
Is it real close to the fire?
Real close, yeah. And sometimes I'll just drop it right on there and just pull it right off. The way some people make mistakes.
Do you wet the paper or?
Sometimes, it just depends. Yeah, sometimes I'll wet it just to get an effect. To get it to work, yeah.
What kind of paper is it?
It's usually a heavy watercolor, a heavyweight watercolor. Sometimes it's the cold press, sometimes it's warm press, depending on the mood I'm under and the technique I'm looking for. You get a little bit more of that, obviously that texture with some than others. And sometimes it's whatever I have around. Sometimes if it's a drawing paper, I'll see what it is. Not too long ago, I threw a piece of rice paper, the Japanese burbank paper on there. Real quick. So, but yeah, it's just a lot of times they're just really fun to experiment with and see. And I always kind of question myself as far as why I tear it in, nice little squares and rectangles and those things like that. And I've got a few where I've just ripped it up and glued it down. But I notice that I do the squares and the rectangles, and it reinforces the idea of the picture plane. But I've often, when I was growing up, I also noticed that I was really inclined. Well, I was a comic book kid. I was one of those kids that always looked at comic books, and I just sometimes think that's probably the panels coming back through my images. And just even some of the hawk that's in the room there. I grew up on Jack Kirby, and he was one of the illustrators of so many great Superman and Avengers books and stuff like that. And he was the one that really kind of characterized that coming at you kind of thing, where the action was coming towards you. And I just sometimes think that's also coming through, and I'm interested in the gesture and movement of the animal many times, and so like that red shoulder in there, I just love the fact that it's just coming right at you. And that was called In an Instant, and my wife and I have had a few experiences over the last couple of years that life just like that, and all of a sudden it turns, and I was sitting in like the old house we were in, there was a house across the street, there was this giant, probably a set of hedges about 9 feet tall, and it was always just a home full of sparrows. Sparrows would get in there, and so at times that thing would just vibrate just with the noise that they were making, and crazy. And all of a sudden, so the truck was warming up, I was sitting there, and all of a sudden I was watching those hedges, and then they just stopped. And all of a sudden this hawk just blew out of the edge, and he grabbed them, and he'd taken a hold of one of those sparrows, and it was an instant. But that's life. I mean, it's just quick, and And so that one just has kind of been in my head for a while, and so that was the result. That's the result of that. But it's just kind of just listening to those things, paying attention to those things, processing those things, and sometimes they immediately come to fruition as an image, and sometimes it takes a while for them to start to come together and develop. So that's where a lot of the images come from.
Billy, how did you build the surface of that picture?
With a sloppy paint brush and flicking it down.
With gesso or?
Right. Gesso's a ground, I don't know if those of you who don't know, kind of like plastering kind of stuff, yeah, that we all paint on. So yeah, and I really like that texture. I think I'm going to do a little more of that. Just as a side note, I use a very, very limited palette. I use cadmium red and yellow, ultramarine blue, and burnt umber, and white. So normally that's the colors that I'm working with. So there is not any black in that painting. All the black looking areas are ultramarine blue and burnt umber. So the crow or raven, I guess I'll have to give Tim a couple of bucks because I used the burnt raven. Is it okay, Tim? Okay. So it's burnt umber and ultramarine blue. And then the really dark areas on the abstract part are ultramarine blue, and of course red, cadmium red.
And which comes first, the painting or the framing?
Well, the framing is the painting too.
In your process?
In the
of putting it
process,
together?
I usually do the order would be the representational piece, then the abstract piece, and then the sculptural piece, because I'm building the sculptural piece in. Yes?
But within that, do you know more or less, like when you're painting that little painting, you know that it's gonna have a certain weight of the frame around it?
Sure.
You've got the elements worked out, like this is obviously really specific, so you know which elements you're gonna have.
Sure. Yes, yeah, there's usually a dozen sketches that are, you're sitting there and you say, okay,
Like preliminary.
yeah, like preliminary sketches. So yeah, the proportions are always kind of, I mean, one of the secrets, and you know this, is art never ever turns out the way you started. Or new artist here, Bob said, with Bob McCoy, who's over here in the corner, another great artist. His stuff, I think, ends up the way it started out. But most people, it kind of evolves a little bit.
I have a question.
Sure.
So, as you read about this new wonderful phenomenon of AI-generated art, and you try to be open-minded. You mentioned the Dada movement, where people condemned it as not art.
Yeah.
People did the same thing about conceptual art, NFTs, which I still think are like
I don't
Bitcoin.
understand that at all.
But
Yeah.
I look at this work, and this is about the privacy of craft. I mean, if you were on one of those sites that says, guess whether this is a human or an AI, yours would be the easiest one to answer. How do you see that, especially as an educator with kids who are very tech savvy? And then, for both of you, have you looked up on AI and said, in the style of, and put your name in,
No, I
and see
haven't
whether or
done
not they've stolen your intellectual property yet?
Tim, you're the educator. So I'll answer.
It's one of those things where I'm still kind of waiting for it. And what I mean by that is I want to see what the real purpose is going to be. Because I mean, the same argument was made with photography when it hit the scene.
Yeah.
There were artists that flipped the table and said, well, I'm done because you can take a photo and, why am I can't pick portraits anymore. And then you saw the group of artists that said, okay, so how do we internalize this? How do we use this to work to our benefit? And I think you're gonna find that group of artists out there that are gonna take that tech and say, okay, I can use this to do something new, because it's a new medium. I mean, it's something, you know, we've, you know, artists have moved into, you know, from photography to film, and we have a lot of artists now that their work is blurred, and, you know, it blurs the edges of things. So I think there's, the time is there, and once artists start to kind of figure out how to use it in the right way, I think it'll be there. I personally, I don't have an interest in it. I mean, I think Billy and I both, what we're really looking for is authenticity, and that doesn't scream authenticity. I think we want authenticity in our imagery, subject matter, the way we make it, how we make it. That's where the craft comes in. That's where the ideas and the concepts come in. And AI right now doesn't feel authentic. We're so busy trying to figure out. It's almost like a seek and find kind of thing in a magazine, the old magazines, where it's just like, well, what's real, what's not? It's a game versus something that we're not really looking at it as, what's the potential of this and how can we use this? And it's also a gotcha where I can steal your stuff and use your stuff and manipulate it. And I think we need to get past that part of it, hopefully, and really figure out what the potential of it is. So.
That's something that people were interested in. The current exhibition at the Art Week in King William is Texas landscapes. And there's a section upstairs where I think about a dozen artists were invited to experiment with AI. And the results were quite interesting. And then we did a short little, had a little talk about it at the last event. But it is a tool.
Yes. Yep.
And the examples that I use are, like you say, photography. People freaked out about television. People freaked out about computers. I'm sure the Catholic Church freaked out about the printing press.
That was mine. That's the one I use. Movable type just really screwed up hand illumination, and it changed theology.
Yeah.
So it's movable type's fault.
Remember the old magazines with the
Real illustrations?
illustrators?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then when the computers came on and that went away,
Yeah.
there was a big loss there.
That was my early art education, was the illustrators and the great old illustrators.
I mean, Pixar shows you that hand animation is not necessarily, that there can be art in something that's not hand
Sure.
animation.
Absolutely.
But I don't know that it's evolved to that state in fine art yet. I do have one unserious question. Have you sprinklered your studio? Have you
No, that takes place outside.
Oh,
I'd like to give
thank
the
you. I
neighbors-
feel much better now.
I'm waiting for the sirens to come to the house someday, where they, you know, so I have a neighbor that gets a little worried and starts to.
Yeah, just
sees
make
the
sure your
giant
insurance
flames.
agent isn't
Yeah,
here.
cut that. No, it's, yes.
Okay, sorry, I wanna shift gears again, if everybody's on the, yes, we're good. But, so, first of all, I'm familiar with both your works, but this is just like an exquisite juxtaposition of everything, and I'm finally seeing just like how it all fits together, and it's just gorgeous, and it's almost like they're inverse of each other in a way. Do you know what I mean? Like the tonalities of them are like reversed. It's really kind of cool. So I just wanted to say that because this is just beautiful.
Thank you.
But I do have a question for Tim.
Yes.
Speaking of which, and seeing it all together and knowing that you guys are friends and working and everything, these three pieces right here, can you talk about these a little bit? Because
It's
it's a shift from
It
what I
is
was
a shift,
saying.
and it's part of that is. That's what it's the right.
What?
They came out of the abstractions in the corner there. The abstractions were kind of a response and a step away from just kind of always doing. I don't want to constantly do the same thing over and over again. So I feel like when I step into abstraction, it allows me to kind of pursue some growth. I look at those as puzzle pieces and figuring things out because they never go the way that you want them to go. There's always a response that happens. And so I started playing with and messing with the idea of the abstractions is landscape, and that's really the essence of it. The ladders, with a lot of the subject matter in the show, these are kind of just reflections on, because I think we were both talking about memory and space. The boats, the chairs, and the ladders are all things that were part of my background coming up. And so in reflecting on the chairs and the boats, the ladder kind of just came in, and I started thinking about just being a kid. And my dad would fashion the ladders out of whatever he had around him. And so I thought, well, I've always had, they've always kind of come up in my sketchbooks, like you say, they've come up in my I've never put them in my imagery, formally, but they've always been there. And I thought, well, what if I kind of explore this a little bit more? And so the ladders were the idea of like perspective. What's our perspective? And so I was reading there's a new book out on Sister Curated Kent, who is the nun, activist, artist, all of the above, kind of an amazing person. And I've used text before, but reading that book and it's basically an essay from her former students and from people that worked with her or that are just responding to her. I thought, what if I started bringing in text in a different way, a different aspect? And then the idea of the landscape with the ladder and the choice and the perspective, we tend to seem to think, what's up, what's down. For some of us, the bottom of the ladder is working our way up. For some of us, it's working the way down. And I think I've come to realize that it's kind of commentary on our perspective of nature. We're up and we're down on it. Yes, we've got to do something, and then we're down on it, we forget about it, and we got to come back up again. It's perspective, just personal perspective. Are we up today or are we down today? So I think that's where it started to evolve. I don't know that I'm there yet with it. I still look at those pieces as kind of transitory, and I'm still exploring that. But the ladder has always been there. One of my earliest memories was my dad had built this ladder. It was a couple of 2x4s, and we had an old rusted swing set it was time to go, so he started cutting it up into pieces. But he used the pieces of the swing set to make the rungs of the ladder. It was rickety and rusty, and he went up the top of the ladder. My brother was holding it at the bottom of the ladder. My mom was standing next to me, and she said, "Come inside." And I said, "Well, why?" I was fascinated by this, watching him, go up this ladder. He was something on the roof, and she said, "Come inside." And so we went inside, and the next thing I know, I hear the crash. My dad had fallen off the ladder and landed on my brother. And she said, "That's why we came inside." So that stays in my memory. And then I've been on a few ladders, and I've fallen off a few ladders. And so they just kind of keep coming back. I just decided to explore it. But I feel like there's deeper connection, and it's the idea of the journey. It's the idea of the moving up, moving on, and again about perspective. And so that's where I'm going with those.
Tim, I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, how do you prepare your panels, or do you do those first? Do you do the art on top? The panels are very much a part of the artwork.
They are. They're in the way that Billy builds. I do the same. They're the 1x2 strips and birch or maple, whichever's cheaper. And then it's a layer of several layers of paint where I'm just kind of putting coats on them, and then I sand them back the way that Billy often kind of brings some of his work back. But I'll take the palm sander to them and rough up the edges and kind of pull some of it back. And in some cases, some of the colors are showing through, and the idea is to sometimes just to kind of represent the idea. A lot of times I'll leave the blue around just because it represents the animal. So like the bird here, it's the sky, it's the heavens, it's that kind of thing. And so they are part of the process, and I love making these. And a lot of times, just like I was asking Billy, sometimes I start bringing the colors back. I'll have several layers of color, and when I start sanding them back, the colors are coming through, and I'm almost making an abstract painting at that point. So I think I've texted you in the past and said, we should just stop right here. This is it. This is done. And then I start layering the paper on top, and then the image comes after that. I'll start drawing onto it. And sometimes you'll see pencil marks and stray marks and stuff, and I used to worry about it, but I think it's part of the process where you'll see some of the ghost images of what was, the position of it. It's kind of like X-raying an old master painting. You'll see the hand was here and it was there, and so I don't mind that, that extra kind of, work in there, line work in there. So, and then I started adding the color to it as well. I just felt like that was a nice little extra kind of evolution of it as well. So yeah, the panels are an important part of that. I resisted before. I was worried about those frames. I've never been really a frame person, and so just letting the paper be the paper and the frame can take care of it. That was hard for me. That was really difficult for me. Not putting it on a panel, not mounting it on something was tough. But yeah, these are very much. And they also the process of putting that paper down and really making sure that it's going to stay down using the glue, and it's a process of really. You're working that paper to a point, because the paper also has this, it's damaged, and so really working it down and gluing it, that's where it's not going to buckle and bump is always a challenge.
Glue, Matt Beatty?
What's that?
What, glue?
It's an archival glue that they use in bookmaking, bookbinding, and I found that it's fluid enough that it allows me to really work it to where it'll lay out smooth and flat. Matte medium it's too quick. It sets up too quick, and I can't
Mess with it.
Yeah, I can't mess with it. So I can't get it smooth enough before it's already starting to
Talk about the circles that are showing up in your things.
The circles, they evolved out of the text. I have an old, I found it one day in the studio, and it was a book that was a book of poetry, an anthology of poetry that I had held onto from my high school. When I was in high school, it was a discarded book. And I was looking for something to just kind of, I'd been leaving basically the holes open and not putting anything there because it was about the holes that we have to fill in our lives. And then I started thinking, well, what if I put a little text in there? What if it ties back into it, or it takes the piece in a different way, to a different place? And I started cutting out, the circle, just cutting out those little pieces of text, little words that jumped out at me that I felt like were important. And so I started putting those in there, and then I started thinking, well, how do I kind of continue that? How do I evolve that? I think with the chair, with the boats, the layers of circles there became, it's the idea of things coming back around again. And then the additional circles in there were kind of that pulse of memory, that pulse of history. And I think that's where they started to really take off for me in that way. The chairs for me, I really started exploring the idea of chairs because, one, I've always loved that Van Gogh painting of Van Gogh's bedroom, right? And I always look at that chair, and that chair was, for him, was the anticipation of the artists that were going to come, be there with him, and he had a seat for them, and it was good, because he wanted to start the artist colony, and I thought that was always kind of really interesting, just thinking about that. And then my brother passed. We were cleaning out his apartment, and there was a chair across the hallway, and he would sit in that chair, and people from the apartment complex would come by, and I had lots of people stop while we were cleaning out his apartment and say, I talked to your brother every day, he was so nice, we had such great conversations, and these were lots of different people from lots of different walks of life, and it's just the power of the chair. And pulling up a chair, having a seat, taking a minute to have a conversation with someone. And so I just thought the chair was important. And so I started looking at it as an object, as a thing that I wanted to represent. So, and then that memory is there. So that's where I started bringing that all together. Jeff, question?
If the school, like almost here, doesn't affect on feathers and kind.
That's done with layers, just starting with a really kind of just a lighter value of like a turquoise, and then layering again with anywhere from ultramarine to a Prussian blue. I think is my final layer. So it's just a really thin wash followed by another thin wash, and just kind of building them up, and then come back in with the line. Good question.
You have a recurring theme of the chair and the letters. Can you really tell us about the
there a significance?
Well, several years ago, I had a series of paintings going that I called Becoming Human. And the bird is a Jungian archetype that appears in a lot of that kind of work. So I would have these human figures that were stretched between a bird representing the higher thought, that free agency, that ability to transcend, and a reptile of some sort, which represented our reptilian brain, turtles, snakes, that kind of thing. So I would have these human figures stretched between the two. I mean, so the reptilian brain being that part of us that says, keep me warm in the wintertime, keep me cool in the summertime, I'm hungry, you know, and the bird being that free agency stuff. And so that kind of evolved away. I'm not sure why it evolved away, and left me with the bird, which is representative of free agency. Normally, that's what it means for me. Yes, ma'am.
How do you decide what kind of bird to carve?
What kind of bird to carve? Usually the wood kind of dictates what kind of bird I'm going to carve. If I know I'm going to use it on the picture plane, I do it in the half round, so it'll be low relief. But if I'm going to take it outside of the picture frame, like this one, then I'll do it in the full round. I have a great friend who's a custom furniture maker who has a great scrap pile. So I usually have access to sometimes mesquite, a lot of spalted, if I've said that correctly, pecan. So most of these pieces, I think, are pecan out of his scrap pile. That's pecan. That's spalted pecan. So, and the scrap of wood itself normally drives how I carve the bird. Or what, you know, I know if I need a bird this long for a painting, I'll look for a piece of wood that's going to work and that has the right kind of grain.
Following up with that, then, did the bird get carved first on that one, or did you do the painting first?
I did the paint on the Roadrunner up there.
Yes.
I did the painting.
Big.
And that's kind of a light, fun piece. But I did the little representation piece, and was worked on the sculptural piece while I was working on the abstract part, and then did the abstract and applied the bird to it. But the whole thing was, I mean, it was planned. It was in a sketchbook.
Okay. And you just happened to find a piece of wood that would.
I looked for that piece. Yeah, I looked for that piece of wood. I mean, I have piles of wood. It's always a problem.
Well, that's a lot of work. Do you have?
You're right. Thank you. I appreciate
That's a
it.
lot of work. I mean, do you have a specific kind of machine that you start out with? It's obviously a block or something, and then you end up by hand.
I use a jigsaw usually to rough it out, and then I use whatever's at hand. I mean, there are normally, my wife fusses at me because there are usually scabs and boo-boos on my.
I mean, that's not with patience too. I mean, I would be like, oh, when am I going to finish that?
That's why they asked about it.
Yeah.
Billy's always been someone who's taken a lot of pride in crafting and building, and just watching him work with his hands. If you walk around his studio, he's got stuff everywhere. But when you see him, he's always tinkering with something. He's always
I can't.
And it's one of those things where I've always appreciated that about him, is that you're getting something that's coming from his hand. And that authenticity we were talking about, he brings it to life, and it's always amazing to see him pull it all together and make it all work, because it comes from different places.
Thank you very much. I can't not be fiddling with something that.
Even when you're relaxing.
Well, sure, especially when you're relaxing. I mean, if you set me down in an auditorium and it's some great speaker, it's Buckminster Fuller has come back to life and he's going to explain buckyballs to you or whatnot. If I have a piece of paper, I'll either be drawing on it or I'll be folding it into something. I mean, I have to keep my hands. I can't. It's not a have to. It's just a I do. In the other room over here, there are a collection of little collages, and they're just ephemera that I had laying around the house, and that at night when I was watching TV, I would be tearing those and gluing them together and saying, okay, this kind of works, this doesn't. But it's happening automatically, I guess. I don't even know how to. So art, I think, is kind of like music. No, I'm only speaking for me right now. There's a bunch of stuff that you have to learn. And then when it's really happening, when it's really great, is when it just happens. It's like, you know, you load the brush up and then before you know it, you have something. But you're not consciously thinking about it, but your subconscious, because of the practice and practice and practice, has put it together. And then you start breaking the rules, I think, to see what this. I used to fuss at Tim because he had figures, animals, whatnot, coming off of the picture plane. But I really like this piece because I'm breaking the rules about having stuff going. Instead of, I mean, theoretically, if academically you would want to flip that bird over and have it flying into the picture plane instead of off of it.
So you're saying it was right?
I would never say you were right. You know? I would only say that I appreciate your point of view and that I needed to. That what works, I think, because it's breaking those kind of rules. But that comes from practicing the rules correctly, I believe. I hope. Anyway, I think I've probably bored you enough. I don't know about it. You have any parting words for me?
I thank y'all for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
I do want to thank you as well because she put this show together. When you're an artist and you drop your work off, and I think Billy and I were both like, oh boy, you know, because my stuff was kind of all over the place, and Billy, we were both talking about doing some different things and trying some different things. And then we left it, and we came back, and I was just floored about how beautifully she put it together.
Thank you very much. You did a good job. Those who know me know I can't hang anything.
Well, I have a lot of wonderful
I know you
people
do.
that help me with the gallery. Sarah is the assistant here. And Susan Riley is the beautiful. I have an amazing group of artists that support the gallery. And I have an amazing family that help with the gallery. So.
And a dog.
And a dog. Oh my gosh, I have the best dog in the world. It comes every afternoon. Ron brings me tea and brings Jax, my dog, and we walk around the block. So, but please enjoy. The show is up through March the 2nd, so a lot of, still a lot of things to enjoy. And we have champagne and there's some cheese, just some goodies. So y'all please enjoy. Thank you so much.